this computer with about 1/3 of our registrants admitted, and there will be more, so I'll be watching carefully and letting them in. It's so great to be joined by my volunteer organization friends again for an invaluable webinar. And we think so highly of Adam Janes that we called him back to do more stuff for us. First things first, I'd like to acknowledge that the land on which I am presently is a traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. We honor all First Nations, of course, Inuit, First Nations, Métis peoples, and their valuable past and present contribution to this land we've grown accustomed to calling Canada home. We're grateful to them for sure. For the folks who may not be aware, Adam Janes is coordinator of volunteer resources at the Ottawa Food Bank. He helps people invest their time and talent into alleviating and eliminating hunger and food insecurity in Ottawa. We've had him here before, and it's great to have him back. He's been a leader in the volunteer sector going on 2 decades, which is longer than me, which is just awesome. And he's focused on volunteer engagement and program evaluation. He holds the CVA, I'm envious, several certifications in healthy childhood development and workshop facilitation. Joining him with that credential, of course, is Chrissy Borseth. Yes, I'm envious of your CVA, Chrissy. Thank you so much for your service. She's been working in the parks, recreation, and culture field for more than 25 years. And she studied in sociology at Trinity Western University as a certified early childhood educator and holds a master's degree in organizational leadership from Royal Roads University out there on the West Coast. A beautiful spot, indeed. Used to be a military college, but I won't mention that.
You can.
It's great to have you with us to talk about advocacy and strategies for the volunteer manager. I'm going to touch on probably communications plans. I'll let some more folks in here. Volunteer engagement, recruitment, partnerships, and collaboration. I know the way that Adam thinks, and I'm pretty sure if he calls on Chrissy to join him, you guys are going to deliver on some pretty imaginative and important issues. So Adam, please take it from here.
Thank you so much, Dean. And I'm just going to take a second to share screen and get my windows all set up. Bear with me.
I'll just take a moment here while Adam's getting set up. I'm joining you from the West Coast, so I would like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the unceded territories of the Stolo people, which includes the Mathakwe, Sumath, and Lakamel First Nations. So hello from the West Coast.
Thank you, Chrissy. You're my superhero today for doing that. Brilliant.
Thank you, Chrissy. And yes, good morning and good afternoon to those joining. We are talking about advocacy strategies for the volunteer management professional today. And we'll get into a wide-ranging and then a very detailed conversation. But without further ado, I want to thank Dean for introducing both Chrissy and myself. We're pretty much repeating some of the things on this slide that you've been able to share. But one story that I'd like to share is that you have kind of a legacy of the advocacy chair at VMPC in this duo today. Is that I was before being vice president of VMPC, I sat in the advocacy chair for 2 years and loved the portfolio and was so excited when Chrissy and I got chatting and that we could connect. And then seeing these opportunities, I thought of nobody better to come in and bring a really great strength to this conversation and to guide us through some, as you said, Dean, some imaginative, but also practical and effective advocacy strategies. So it is so exciting to get started on this conversation. I do like to tell people what I'm going to tell them before I tell them. I probably said that last month too, just to keep me accountable to what we're doing and on track. So we'll do some opening remarks and a little bit of a welcome. And then going through our objectives and agenda today, I really do want to set the tone for the conversation. Chrissy's going to lead us through an amazing conversation on understanding the advocacy landscape, as well as recognizing challenges. And then we're going to get into some key strategies, talking about both utilizing statistics and stories, we had lots of other parts, so there might be a future conversation, but we figured it's a lunch and learn. There's some great people around the room with probably some great opinions of their own to chat and have discussion about. So we're gonna kind of hope we capture all this. If we don't even get to the end of this because of the discussions, we're okay with that. It's fine, but we have a really great kind of allotment to fill the time, and we're looking forward to that engagement. And as always, I'd like to invite everybody to be engaged as possible if you want. I know a lot of you are probably, chowing down a salad or a sandwich right now, but if you want to join in the conversation and be involved by raising your hand to ask a question or make a comment and discussion, you can also utilize the chat feature, which hasn't disappeared on me this time. In the past Zoom meeting, I couldn't find the chat button for a while, but utilize the chat. So if you haven't done it already, put your name, your role at your organization, and your favorite thing about April in the chat box, just to give us a chance of kind of enjoying. I know spring is a nice season for a lot of people. I love the greenification, as there's kind of like 1 week where everything goes from brownish to bright green, and it's just such a wonderful change in color, and you can kind of see spring on its way. And that greenification is my thing about April that I'm really excited about, and National Volunteer. So feel free, fill up the chat with those, and that would be an awesome way to engage with each other and get going. So I wanted to pass to Chrissy, but as well to just open remarks, and we'll just set the stage for what we think would be a really great conversation.
Thanks, Adam. I'm really excited to be joining Adam and to be connecting with all of you. As I mentioned, I'm from the West Coast, and I work in a lot of community engagement, which we do through our volunteer programs. I work in a municipality, so a little bit different than a nonprofit, but a lot of There we go. I got muted. Are we back?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good. Sorry about that. So as I was saying, I got started in advocacy before I even knew I was in advocacy. I find that when you become passionate about something, you start you start cheering for it, and you start trying to make things happen. And that's really what advocacy can come down to. So we're going to have that discussion, and we're going to continue on. Adam laid out what our webinar is going to look like. So I'm going to throw it back over to him to get started on setting the tone.
Thank you, Chrissy. So I think setting the tone is really important in advocacy, and especially as not-for-profit professionals. I think in volunteer management, we have a very specific role, and the more I meet people who are in the role, I meet more people who are passionate about the role, I see its uniqueness. And so I just want to put a few points out there that could help us in shaping our advocacy. So as we set the tone for advocacy, we have to declare and admit we are a growing profession. The last month, if you were here for the retrospect, we've only been a profession per se for the most part for 40 or so years. It's not something that's been done for hundreds of years. Volunteerism and leading volunteers has been done for hundreds of years. But as a profession in an organization where you have certain position titles and structures to advocate for, and a supervisor to report to, and a board who can evaluate your program, that whole structure hasn't been in place for very long. So we can look at it and set the tone that we are a growing profession. It's advancing, it's changing, it's adapting as we go. And there's lots to thinking of in that way. There are amazing resources out there, but there is no one instruction book or standard across the board for organizations and volunteers to follow. So this gives you lots of opportunity to look for and bring in resources that can help you advocate. And so that's a really great piece, is that your organization might have ideas about volunteer management. It might have preconceived notions of how valuable it is, but there are resources out there that can add to that value, that can, if there's not a clear definition of volunteerism. There's things in places out there that you can draw in as resources. We're a dynamic profession. This is a really important one to see that there are different ways of leading volunteers, different types of programs, different levels of investment in programs, different ways of evaluating the value of a volunteer program. And we cross multiple sectors. So there's so much we can learn from other leaders of volunteers in other places and spaces to build case studies, to build engagement. So looking at that dynamic, we really can look and see that we are a dynamic profession. This one's really important for setting the tone, is sometimes we don't always put it out there that we are a resource generating profession. Is that we not just come with a job list of tasks that we complete, but we're actually building resources and generating more engagement through adding time and talent into our ecosystem, into our organizations. And it is true that volunteerism can be overlooked, but I've a sincere belief, and I really want to champion this, is that once we've proven and are able to advocate appropriately for the impact that is happening in our organizations, the value of volunteerism in our organizations is undeniable. And I might be glitching there a bit. I apologize. Can you still hear me even though I'm purple?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. This last point is really great, and this week just shows it. If you look through social media feeds and other things, you can really see how undeniable the power of volunteers across all kinds of different organizations. So things to think about before we get into the specific topic of advocacy and how to advocate in the volunteer management profession. Over to you, Chrissy.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. It looks like you've kind of stepped into a club there with how your screen is right now. There you go. Yeah, raving. I couldn't not say it. So yeah, thanks, Adam, for just kind of setting the scope of what we'll be talking about within the advocacy landscape. So if we define advocacy and volunteer management, we ask, what does advocacy actually mean? Like, it's a great word. What does it mean? Advocacy is the act of supporting or promoting a cause, idea, or group of people to bring about positive change or influence decision-making. So advocacy can come in many forms. It involves actively speaking up on behalf of others or yourself, raising awareness, which is huge, about issues, working towards solutions. Advocacy can take various forms, including lobbying policymakers, organizing campaigns, raising public awareness, providing support and resources, and engaging in dialogue with stakeholders, other people who are involved in the same type of work or ideas that you're looking to promote. Its ultimate goal is to bring about social, political, or systemic change that benefits the individuals or communities being advocated for. The role of advocacy in volunteer management is like being a guide or a voice for volunteers and volunteer leaders, ensuring that they have support and recognition that they deserve. Advocates who are standing up for volunteers, as well as the profession of volunteer managers, is the heart of advocacy and volunteer management. In simple terms, advocacy and volunteer management is about making sure volunteers and volunteer leaders are heard, supported, and appreciated for the amazing work they do. So we've clarified the role of advocacy and volunteer management and what advocacy is. Beyond fairness, advocacy involves providing practical support to volunteers, but it doesn't really stop there. It looks at the bigger pictures and tries to advance rules or policies that may have made it harder for volunteers to do their work in the past. As Adam mentioned, we're a growing and new profession, as well as the concept of volunteering isn't really brand new, but I think in its current form, it is. It's really evolved. If you think about like industrial revolution and where we've come from in sort of like a workforce, volunteering wasn't necessarily something that was planned out. It was something people did to just help one another, but in its current form where there are roles and specific placements and that as such has really grown and evolved in the last, say, 50 years for sure. Advocacy is also spreading the word about how important volunteering is and plays a vital role in raising awareness uh, about the impact of volunteerism has on communities. By sharing success stories, organizing events, or engaging with the media, advocates help shine a spotlight on the value of volunteerism and inspire others to get involved. In essence, the role of advocacy in volunteer management is multifaceted. It's about being a champion for volunteers and other leaders, ensuring that both have the support they need to thrive, and advocating for a more inclusive and supportive environment to flourish. It's about making sure volunteerism is valued and individuals feel empowered and recognized for their invaluable contributions to society. One way that advocates can move towards that success is connecting your advocacy to your organizational goals. Okay, that sounded a little messed up. Let's try that again. One way of working towards success in your advocacy is linking what you're trying to advocate to your organization's goals. So if you think about your organization and what their mission statement, what their pillars or goals are, and you work your advocacy dreams and desires to match those, that's a way of being able to advocate well where you are at. If you are well versed on the goals and mission statement of your organization, you can advocate around them and create even more influence towards your success. For instance, if you're advocating in a company that has a goal of eco-friendly practices, they want to be as green as possible, showing how your volunteer management tools or digital software, getting away from paper-based, can actually support their environmental goals, can be a way towards advocating that. And that may sound like really simple, like, oh yeah, we want to get away from paper-based, but helping your decision makers make that connection can really inspire them to be able to say yes, get to that advocacy goal achievement. It means making sure that supporting the cause isn't just your idea or a side project. It's something that fits within the organization or something that fits within whomever is making those decisions, and helps you get to yes. So we want to talk about some challenges that come in advocacy, and I'm sure everyone has, a wish or desire that has created some challenges in trying to get to a yes in their advocacy goals. I'd like to open it up if anyone would like to share some common challenges they've faced. I'm sure there's some common ones. Would anyone like to either put in the chat or turn their mic on and share with us some challenges they've faced in advocacy?
Hi, Chrissy. One of the things that we have a challenge with is drawing the line over which folks who understand advocacy as part of their mission know not to cross. So there's a nonpartisan, non-political or apolitical side to that line, which is the good side. And then there's the other side, which is the side that you don't want to cross. And so I have great challenges describing where that line is and why it's important everybody understand where it is.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else?
I can jump in. So what I've encountered is working as a volunteer coordinator in a multi-site organization, and then where I can actually support the organization is in a very limited way. And this is typically when I've worked for a fundraising department and they only really want me to support the philanthropic goals and they don't really care about program volunteers. There's no vision for that. And I've even been told like, well, where are we going to get the money? Nobody ever asks, where do we find the money to hire the accountant for the company? But when it comes, or for the organization, but when it comes to volunteer management, all of a sudden we need to we have to justify that somehow financially. And it's very short-sighted.
Yeah,
And then,
Yeah.
and I think the other challenge on the flip side is if an employer, nonprofit employer doesn't even have a volunteer coordinator, it's like advocating to employers about what a resource they're missing out on when they don't have volunteer coordinators at all.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you touched on a couple of really common challenges, and a lot of them are around funding and money for wages of volunteer management staff, for program funding, and then also advocating for a seat at the table. A common challenge is to just have that understanding of the impact you're making. Thank you. Anyone else?
While people are thinking, there's a couple of great ones in the chat.
Thank you.
Kyla is saying defining roles between staff and volunteers. Senior management can
Mhm.
seem to think volunteers can replace staff, and that's a good ethical question that I've seen a number of times this week come up. As we
Yeah.
talk about honoring volunteers, we also have to talk about not, either replacing work or forcing people into volunteer roles that are actually more like paid jobs. And that's
Yeah.
a very important consideration for advocacy is the investment in the volunteer program actually helps prevent those sorts of things from happening, and seeing
Mhm.
that is a huge point.
And making sure roles are very clearly defined
Yeah.
so that there is an understanding where volunteers can fit in and where they should not. So yeah, that's huge. Yeah.
And then Deb is sharing that when your advocate, senior management person leaves the organization and you have to start all
Mm.
over again.
Yes. Yes. And we're going to talk about knowing who to talk to. So yes, that is huge. Thanks, Deb.
We have Jessica and then Dean has his hand up.
Yeah.
So I was speaking with another consultant from the US this morning, and I actually reflected back on my career because we were both kind of sharing how did you get here to where you are. And there's 3 roles in my career where I left to go somewhere else after being, coordinator, specialist, senior manager, whatever I was in that role. And the role was
Mhm.
never replaced.
Wow.
And when it was brought up, it was, we're going in a different direction. The staff partners can do all the stuff that you were doing.
Hmm.
We don't have the volume to, justify having a role. And it just, yeah. Anyways, I'm starting to get angry, so I'm going to stop talking.
No, I can see how that would be frustrating. Thank you for sharing, Jessica. And that's a key piece in advocacy. And it's unfortunate that you had to leave those places, but maybe there's a reason why. So
And I have to say, these were all large national organizations that have a lot of money. So it's not they couldn't afford me. They just decided to hire elsewhere.
Yeah. So there's that understanding piece. Yeah.
Yeah. The short-sightedness of that is that I feel that anger. It's a little bit of, we don't have the volume. Of course you don't. You're not investing in the position. You're not going to build a volume if you're not investing in it. So
Yeah.
All right. Huge advocacy piece there. 100%.
Yeah.
And we'll get into that because that's a data story too, and that large scale. There's some interesting pieces there. Dean.
Yeah, there's a number of skills that are in the competency for advocacy. And one of them that is most interesting to me is the values-based decision making. And I'm always intrigued to see how organizations work that dialogue to come to some agreement, how best to define what you mean by values, because there's a whole bunch of different ways to approach that. And I've tried some of my own, but I recognize that there are different concepts of values. So I'm keen to learn from CVAs who might have experience in that area.
And that's a really great approach for an organization to say they're making their decisions by, but you first have to identify which values you are defining that and whose voices get to determine those. Is it organization wide? Is it leadership, and how that impacts? But yeah, thank you for sharing that, Dean.
I agree. Yeah, there's in most organizations that are serious about it, they'll have espoused values like integrity, honesty, blah blah blah. But those are not the kinds of things people will be ready to admit. They'll be more about, oh, that saves me money, that offers convenience, that's important to my friends and relationships. That's a different approach to values. So somewhere in there is a mix that helps with what it is we're promoting, this values-based decision making. And I'm always keen to learn from experts like you and Adam. Thank you.
Thank you. So I had listed out here a bunch of challenges that are fairly common in advocacy and things that keep coming up for volunteer management. And I'm just looking through my list, and pretty much all of them have been listed. I will still mention that a lot of these challenges where there's a tweak here and a tweak there, but a lot of them come from gaining understanding at that, or even a seat at that decision-making table for those in charge, whether they're federal government, whether they're an organization, whether they're a small nonprofit, those people that are making those decisions that impact your recruitment, your wages, your program funding, your retention. Having a seat at that table and having an understanding at that table is what's key in understanding advocacy from them. One other thing I'll mention, or sorry, two other things, is self-care. It's probably one of the last things volunteer management leaders forget to advocate for. And I don't think that that's uncommon, but advocating for your own self-care is, you need that day off. You need that time away in order to recharge. Especially, like as Jessica mentioned, you might even need to advocate for yourself to leave a job that is not serving you or is frustrating you, because burnout is a significant concern for volunteer leaders. You may experience exhaustion, become overwhelmed due to the pressures of your role, and then you become less effective and just not happy. And so we need to remember that advocating for ourselves with self-care and to avoid burnout is also challenging. It's a challenge to do that for yourself, but is hugely important. So we've talked about some of the challenges and how can we navigate those. So we're going to explore a little bit the dynamics of persuasion and influence, which is advocacy. Persuasion and influence are key in advocacy because they can help you get your message across, gather support, and make that change happen. Good advocates use these skills to convince people to care about their cause, rally support from different groups, and navigate some of the challenges we just discussed. Dean mentioned skills of advocates, and I think understanding persuasion and understanding where influence lies. We talked about the seat at the table, and someone else mentioned earlier about when your advocate leaves. So who's your next person? So understanding who you can influence, how you can influence them. And we're going to talk about, as Adam mentioned, some data and stories and stats, fun stats, as ways that you can look at that influence. By understanding how to persuade and influence others, advocates can make a bigger impact and push for positive changes, not just in your organization, but in society. I mean, that's what lobbyists do, is they push for change that can impact larger areas. Unraveling how people convince each other to think or act, it's almost a bit of a puzzle, can guide someone towards your idea. Crafting your message with both logic and emotion can help you in your advocacy. It's about who you're talking to, recognizing who holds that power, as we mentioned, and who can help you move forward in your advocacy. Timing and setting are also important. So thinking about, the end of the day on a Friday, probably not the best time to go in and have that big conversation about program funding or getting a seat at that table, or your own personal burnout, even though that's when you might be really feeling that burnout, is a Friday at the end of the day. That might be more of a Tuesday 10 a.m. conversation where you're feeling refreshed, you've had a chance to get into the week, you're going into a neutral space. So timing, setting, and how you're presenting it can play a huge role in your advocacy. And, all of these sound like, oh, yeah. But we really sometimes forget those in that moment when we become passionate about something. So it's about planning it out. We all have biases and shortcuts that influence how we think and make decisions. Strong persuaders can use these shortcuts to their advantage by crafting messages that tap into what we already believe and how we tend to think. So it's getting people on your side by appealing to what will move them. In short, understanding persuasion and influence helps us navigate advocacy. By knowing how these things work, we can better advocate for our volunteers, other volunteer leaders, and ourselves. I'm going to pass it over to Adam now to talk a little bit about the power of stats in advocacy. Thanks.
Yeah, I want to transition too, because this topic here is one that really, in my own journey, I'm reflecting on that. How do you choose what to advocate for, and to what pedals to press? And so when I was developing my advocacy journey, I thought that curiosity was another one of those. If you thought of a dashboard of skills and strategies you could lean on, is taking a real curiosity into other people's work, into your organizational. So many people, they get handed a strategic plan as like, here's our organization's strategic plan. You're not on it, but here it is. But looking into it and seeing how volunteers fit into the various goals and crediting them. And that leads very much into the data aspect. But this really, the different ways in which we can like look at our tools and our skills to engage with people to build advocacy. It's definitely a long game. It's definitely not transactional. So I think about that as you become persuasive and as you become influential, you're building credibility. And I think that's another important verb for us to think about is do they see us as the expert in the field, and how do we have evidence to show? So even the things like getting your CVA is a great way to share and show that you do know what you're talking about. It's not just stuff you're making an opinion about, but you have the backings to really make that. So I think those are really key. And then ultimately, how do you advocate as a team? Like how does your message come across as something that's going to be a win for the rest of the team and a benefit? So those are all, I look at that dashboard and see there's a lot of different buttons that you can add and different strategies you can build into it. And if we had more time, we'd go into them into more depth, but I definitely want just to note those ones as we go into just two key areas that really do have an impact on your advocacy storytelling at that Tuesday morning meeting. What are you going to bring to somebody to make a compelling case? And that's a really important piece. So when I think about it, I did a lot of advocating over a cup of coffee. So that's why I picked a nice picture of somebody having coffee. But choosing your approach is really important, and how you go about it and what you share during that time. So hopefully you've heard that Volunteer Canada, the NPC, the Associated Fundraising Professionals of Canada have all teamed up to create a data hub called the givingandvolunteering.ca. It's an awesome resource in its infancy. We're looking for new data, and I think everybody here who is a data nerd is probably like, we need that new data set of where is the state of volunteering across Canada, where the data is. We know lots of stories, we know lots of anecdotes, but where is that? So that's one place to start, is where are our data sources and how are we gathering them? We have our own data as well. Each program, each person in their profession, hopefully you're keeping some key metrics along the way. At least the number of hours the volunteers are investing in your community, at least the number of volunteers, unique volunteers and roles that you have. Because from that, you can design some metrics that are really impactful. But I just wanted to share with you in two different ways some of the same statistics and see which one lands with you a little bit more convincingly. So we have 100 volunteers. This is hypothetical, by the way. I'm not quoting this from anywhere in particular, just in case people are like, where is that? Where's that from? We have 100 volunteers to give us 200 hours. Or 2,000 hours, sorry. But how does that leave you? That's nice. That sounds, that's good. That's some awesome. But if I took the time to really delineate that data and bring it to you in a way that says, our volunteer program of 100 leaders and helpers lead 25 children's programs ranging from youth leadership to sports and arts programming over 2 sessions in our fall and winter. Giving this 2,000 hours, they ensured safe, fun, positive mentorship for at-risk children and youth. 5 out of 6 youth say that they're happier because of these programs. The cost to hire 25 leaders and 75 assistants is well over in excess of $50,000, not including staffing expenses and paid training times. Which one's going to stick with you? Which one are you going to go, whoa, that's actually way more invested than I thought? So as we break down and expand our statistic sets, you can see how you can tell a more compelling anecdote. And then when you bring real life stories into that as well, which Chrissy's going to get into more detail, you have this 1-2 punch. And we talked a lot about advocacy. And one of the things we talked about is statistics speak to the mind and the stories speak to the heart. So I'll pass it back to Chrissy to expand on telling stories for advocacy.
Thanks, Adam. I'm just going to jump on one other piece that came to mind for me with Adam's talk about stats is in the organization that I'm in, municipality, a lot of it comes down to dollars and cents. So for me, when I'm looking at my stats, translating them all into a financial figure is huge. And that really speaks to our leadership team. So that's one other way to spin your stats into something that's going to be impactful. Moving on, talking about stories. So as Adam mentioned, a lot of us have like little anecdotes or stories of volunteer or a client has come and shared with you about their time. Using those in your advocacy piece is, as Adam said, is what's speaking to the heart. Now, it might not always be easy to collect all that information or get that down. One tip that I use just in a practical way is around National Volunteer Week, I'll ask my volunteers to submit a story. So they're doing some of the work for me. They're writing that all down. And then by doing that, they earn a bonus treat or a courtesy pass to one of our rec programs or whatever I've had permission to give out randomly for our volunteers. And that's a way for us, for me to leverage getting some of those stories and getting them in their own words, because that's also really impactful in sharing that. Stories are powerful tools in advocacy because they connect with people's emotions and they make issues more relatable and compelling. When we as advocates tell those stories, we're helping to create this personal connection that can inspire action and drive change. So there's those emotional stories that really pull at the heartstrings. And then there's stories that, are more fact-based and incorporate stats. Different types of stories evoke different emotions. I know for myself, program stories specifically about programs are really impactful for the leaders I have. Are there specific types of stories that this group has had experience with using in your advocacy that you would like to share? Feel free to share them in the chat, or if you'd like to raise your hand and share with us some stories that you've had success with. Okay, I'm not going to wait too long here. So if you'd prefer to just share them in the chat, that's totally fine. Stories make, sorry, Adam.
Kathleen has written about kind of knowing our audience is a really important part of statistics and stories, and the shape of the story, the length of the story, all those things are about knowing who we're speaking to. And different advocacy campaigns have different audiences as well. You could be trying to build affinity with your own supervisor or somebody who's the director of a different program. So you really do have to gear to your audience. That's a great point to be able to hone in on and create and customize the advocacy. Don't just have your tried and true slide deck that you bring everywhere with you and say the same thing to everyone, because that might not hit the same way. And so that's a great point. Thank you, Kathleen. Heather, do you want to talk about Veronica and her experience rather than me read through it for you?
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight, and some of you may have seen this at the last hybrid conference. So PAVRO's Vice Chair Veronica Daly has created a volunteer annual report that she uses at UHN to sort of, you know, highlight the impact that the volunteers and their volunteer leaders have. So this has really just pulled that out of the back page, because we've probably all been there, where, you know, you submit, you know, great stories and images and everything, and you get like a quarter of the page at the back. So you know, so she's advocated for and been successful in having this annual volunteer report go out that really showcases what the volunteers are doing at the hospital. And she's got some great tips and tools, so I will make sure that she shares that with everyone.
Yes. And that's huge. I've done the same thing. And being able to create your own annual report just for volunteers, even if it's not glossy and pretty, volunteers love to see that. And once it's created, you'll find it goes far wider and contributes to your advocacy journey far more than you initially imagined. So finding the time to do it can be challenging, but hugely successful if you're able to make that happen. Whether it's sharing a testimonial from an affected volunteer, as we've talked about, or personal stories, they can make a difference, and it's important in and why it's important to take action on your advocacy. Stories have the power to inspire hope and resilience by highlighting these stories of individuals or communities overcoming adversity. Advocates can instill a sense of optimism and possibility in their audience. This can motivate people to get involved and contribute to solutions, knowing that change is possible, even in the face of challenges. So a few years ago, there was a story that you may have remembered circling around social media, the Ice Bucket Challenge. Does everybody remember that? Yes. Okay. So I think this is a hugely successful example of storytelling in advocacy. So their goal was not only to raise funds, which they did. They raised over 115 million for ALS research, which previous to this, yes, people were aware of ALS and you know, the impacts on individuals affected, but it was not something that I think was top of mind. And so this was aimed also at raising awareness. And the challenge involved something so simple, just pouring an ice bucket of cold water over a person's head and nominating others to do the same. So there wasn't literally the telling of a story, but it created, but it is still a storytelling, because it created a story of this ice bucket challenge, right? So, and if you think of the impact that it had, that we pretty much all here are aware of it, depending on our level of involvement with this is pretty impactful. So the objective, as I said, was to raise awareness and funds for ALS research. And they started with some videos of themselves pouring this ice bucket, and it just spread like wildfire. And it significantly increased public awareness, as I mentioned, and raised 115 million. So pretty big impact of storytelling for this. So I'm going to pass it back over to Adam, and he's going to share a little more.
Thank you, Chrissy. I think, and this might be foggy memory, but that money directly led to a very significant breakthrough in ALS research. So it's kind of interesting that it wasn't just money for money's sake, but that they actually got to a level where they had the money to do the research that they needed to do to get to the science of it all. And so impact and investment and then outcome is a huge piece. Aaron said on the chat, said one of my favorite things is directly tying volunteer engagement to mission. And the more ties you can, like bows you can connect, like I mentioned, the strategic plan and volunteers aren't on there, but they're all the way through it. And if you were, had the ability and can speak to that, it's like one of the terms that I'm saying at work a lot of times here is because volunteer resources is in the HR people and culture department is saying, well, people and culture is staff and volunteers. So anytime you're saying people and culture, you have to think staff and volunteers. Sure, if you're talking about HR, that's HR, but volunteer resources is part of people and culture. So let's continue as we have staff meetings that and volunteers is something we remember and are reminded to say as we talk about people, our people and culture at the Ottawa Food Bank. So these are really key little things that help people think of the whole. And one joke I had is that I'm representing all of our volunteers here today because they don't fit in the room because there's too many of them and we don't have enough seats for everybody to come and join. And that they're kind of, because they're not in the staff meetings, sometimes people don't think of their impact. So I think a bit of our advocacy is reminding people in rooms that the volunteers aren't sitting in that they are present and their voice needs to be mentioned and their value needs to be shared. So that's definitely a part of it. So I just pictured tying little bows to each of the strategic points, right? And kind of connecting that to the volunteer investment. And another statement that I said is that any program that has volunteers as a part of it, they should be getting mentioned in the impacts, right? And that's another one is that sometimes people run with the impacts of a program and somewhere along the line, they thank the volunteers, appreciate the volunteers, but when they get to reporting the success of it to a board or something, maybe that and volunteers part lost its way because for whatever reason. So making sure that they stay in the conversation of the impact they had the whole way through is another challenge, but also something that we can practice advocating for along the way. So I think that's really great. And some great reminders. And I always like to say that this is the start of a conversation and that there are always places and spaces to do next steps. There's obviously a lot of energy behind advocating. There's a lot of, we look at the big picture of things and see a lot of holes in what could be and what might be. And advocacy is a great place to kind of point out some of those infrastructural holes. We have some awesome news that, the federal government is investing some money in volunteerism across Canada this budget year. We want to advocate that we use that money to invest, to convince them to invest more. So there's that definite, we have precedent, we have, this opportunity, but that's a big conversation to have and we'll be having, I'm sure, over the next number of months and years. But get connected and get creative. Those are the two kind of aspects that you think about is, do you have an advocacy plan? Do you want to meet another leader or volunteers somewhere for coffee and talk about your advocacy plan and their advocacy plan? And you can kind of spitball and have a really nice kind of in-depth conversation. Here's what I'm thinking I need. What are you thinking that you might need? And there's always something that we can advocate for. And we've got to pick our places and you don't want to be the person always asking for more, but how we bring that up and how we define our cases is a great conversation topic is that, well, I want to expand the capacity of this organization to meet its mission. I think that volunteers involved here, and here could really be able to establish this much more value and this much more impact. Like, how could we see that happening? And that's a great exploration, right? And so get creative, get thinking about different ways you can advocate for your profession. And, if you're constantly behind and that it's because the HR equivalent of your role is well above what you can handle, there's a spot to advocate what are the realistic ways you can balance that out. And there's some really important conversations there. If it's something as simple as our organization says it values professional development, but volunteer program doesn't have a professional development fund. How does that align and utilize, like you said, those organizational goals to be able to advocate and to align some of that value to your program to gain what you need to do to succeed and to meet the need. And that's a big part of it. There will be lots of other opportunities to engage in advocacy. Chrissy is your connection to get connected with VMBC and what's happening in advocacy. We have some resources that we're starting to develop and engage, but you can learn more about our advocacy from our website. This will be passed on in the slide deck. We also have a standards of practice, which I think is a really great, if you haven't taken the time and got a nice big pot of tea ready and ready to do a bit of a deep dive read, these documents can really help spark, am I being treated fairly as a leader of volunteers according to what I'm being asked to do as a professional? Is my to-do list, my task list, the number of things I'm responsible for, the number of people I'm responsible for, in line with a standard of practice that's out there? And fortunately in Canada, we have some standards that we can align with. This is a future project and an advocacy piece that we probably are going to revisit these and adapt them and move them forward. But we do have significant resources to find our best practice, whether it's our standards at VMPC, the Canadian Code for Volunteer Involvement, or the CVA certification website. There's 3 amazing resources that you can really use as a backstop to say, here's building a case of here's what professional volunteer managers need and have and are to successfully fulfill their roles, and here's what they can provide. And when equipped well, it's amazing to see the value of that program just continue to grow. And when you have that advocacy, when you have those champions in your organization, we've seen it. We've seen so many strong programs and creative programs, and volunteers become such a part of your organization that it's hard to tell the difference between a volunteer and a donor because they're doing both and you're fully engaged. And that's the piece where how do we best get to that point to help people convince? And I mean, there's a general stat out there I think I found that was something like, if somebody's volunteering for your organization, they're 17% more likely to be a donor than the average person. But in various volunteer programs, I'm sure it gets much higher in organizations where the volunteer program is prioritized and well equipped, and that community is really developed out of that volunteer program. So lots of pieces to reflect on. I see we have a few minutes left. If anybody wants to join the conversation at the end, that would be lovely here. Take
Yeah,
away
if anybody
something that's
has
resonating.
any questions, raise your hands and I'll bring them to attention. Hi, Alex. Go ahead,
Hi there.
Alex.
Yeah, so I found that the discussion today kind of touched a little bit on advocating for the profession versus advocating for volunteerism, and there's certainly a lot of overlap, but I've sort of wondered, like, I know that when I was president of PAVRO, VMPC did organize a few kind of meetings with other provincial affiliates across the country. I don't know if that's been happening, Heather, but like to me, it seems like advocating around the profession should be like that would be a really good thing for us to be gathering around, right? Especially now that the government has put in place the money for volunteerism, and because I think if we advocate for the profession, ultimately that's going to benefit the volunteers as well.
Yeah.
So, like that, I think there's an opportunity there for us to kind of have some strength in numbers if we kind of work together as associations.
Yeah. And speaking to that positively, Volunteer Canada has it in writing in their pillar. I think it's their 4th pillar is investing in the infrastructure, volunteer centers, and leader of volunteers. So they know, and it's in there. So it's our job to keep them accountable to say, what does that mean? Like, where does that, where's the actions within that pillar, and how can we contribute to them? So I think that's huge. And I think the next 2 years, there's a huge opportunity to build strength in that pillar of infrastructure and yeah.
If I could just add on to that. So at PAVRO's conference in May, we are going to be joined virtually by Megan Conway from Volunteer Canada. She and I are going to be having a conversation that's then going to when it's a plenary session. So attendees, we're all going to have an opportunity to answer some questions and share sort of what does this mean for me, my organization, myself as a professional in Ontario. That information definitely I've going to share that back with Megan and her team from Volunteer Canada, but certainly I'm going to share it with the NPC and our other partners, so that we can at least start that conversation. You know, it's an awesome thing, and I was in the process of writing out my questions for Megan, and now I have to go back and change it because a lot of them were now like, okay, so now we have some money. We don't have all that they were asking for, but we have some. So I want her to answer sort of where they be prioritizing. But yeah, no, for sure, it's a first start, and yes, it'll be interesting to see how this works. I have a little bit of skepticism, just because we have federal organization, or national organization dealing with the federal government, where a lot of our challenges, at least here in Ontario, and I know others, you know, is that our provincial governments haven't placed volunteerism into their programs as I have done in BC and as I have done in Newfoundland. So we've got some great things to be working on advocacy. So this is a top up, bottom down, meet in the middle, crossroads,
Yes.
you name it. Lots of
Yes.
things that we can be doing together for sure.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with your analogy for, you know, from the bottom and the top. Let's all angles from the side. Yeah. Any other questions?
I think that might bring it to an end. Thank you so much, Adam and Chrissy. That you guys are a dynamic duo for sure, and that was an outstanding presentation. We're so glad that you were able to contribute again, Adam, and bring such a professional assistant like Chrissy to this particular forum. I also wanted to thank Jessica and Aaron Spink and Alex and Deb and others who contributed in the chat to the discussion. So many invaluable points. I wanted to leave the last point to our president, Heather Johnson, just in case Heather needed to say some important things about the upcoming conference and others.
Thank you, Dean. Again, on behalf of all of us, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Adam, so much for being here today. Thanks to everyone for taking some time out of a very busy National Volunteer Week to be here today. Yes, I want to send our best wishes on to the NPC as they are hosting their conference the beginning of May, and PAVRO was hosting our conference the week after. So hopefully attendees today will be able to come to one or both, and participate and get involved and reconnect with our fellow professionals, and look forward to all the work that both our organizations are going to be doing along the fields of advocacy and others. So thank you everyone for being here, and enjoy the rest of your day, and happy National Volunteer Week.
Thank you, Adam and Chrissy. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Cheers. The best.